Xilonen is the most meta character released in Genshin Impact since the introduction of Furina 1 year ago. She is the most noticeable form of power creep ever introduced into Genshin Impact, and no, she did not power creep Kazuha. I have spent a ridiculous amount of time testing over 60 teams to help you decide if you should get her and how to make the most out of her if you do. Welcome to Geo Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Xilonen is an off-field Geo dedicated support. She heals, she resistance sheds, she buffs, she even cooks for you. She does not cook for you. Built into her kit, she has the ability to shred resistances very similar to the Viridescent Venerer artifact set. She can shred Geo, Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, and Electro. To do this, you are required to have that element in your party. You are required to have 2 of Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro characters. If you fill your team up with Geo and only have 1 Pyro, she won't shred those resistances. To activate this ability, you will need to use her skill. Following that, you will need to normal attack twice. This will activate the source samples, which are what give you the resistance shred, and for 15 seconds, this effect will continue. It only has a 7-second cooldown, so if you need to generate more energy and you have room in your rotation, you can do 2 skills per rotation. There's not too many teams that need this, but it does come up sometimes. Her burst heals your active character, and it heals quite a bit. I found myself very satisfied by her healing. The cooldown is only 15 seconds and heals you for 12 seconds, so this fits on almost every single rotation in the game, and overall in terms of the length of buffing and healing, this is quite satisfactory. Her first passive gives her a damage bonus if you want to use her on a DPS team. We'll talk about the power of that a little bit later. Her second passive means that when you do the normal attacks after your skill, you provide 2 stacks of Night Soul burst. This is the mechanic that other characters like Mualani have, where her burst gets a damage increase of 15, 30%, or 45% that's triggered when other characters trigger a Night Soul burst. She triggers 1 for herself, so Xilonen doing 2 stacks means she gets all 45% of that passive, and her burst is really strong, so this is not an insignificant amount of damage. This passive also just gives a little bit of defense, and her other passives are for exploring. Nice. For her build guide, the only stat that actually matters in her kit when she's playing a supportive role is defense, and it only matters for her healing. And I personally found that her healing just with a normal max defense build is perfectly fine. If I were you, I'd save the resources and leave her at level 90, but I definitely would ascend her. I would ascend her just for the ability to be able to crown her skill, because the elemental resistance decrease that she gives comes directly from her skill's talent level. So I don't know if crowning is necessarily worth it. You could leave it at level 9 for a while. It's definitely worth it, obviously, if you want to max things out. It's a guaranteed upgrade. You should definitely do it eventually. It wouldn't be the first thing I crown on your account, but it's something I would definitely get to eventually. The burst, I like to leave it at level 9. The healing is great, but I definitely don't want to use the resources to crown. You could probably leave it at level 8 as well, but I like to be comfy. I like to have healing, and of course, more healing means more Furina fanfare. So if you do decide to level her burst and you do decide to level her 90, you will get Furina fanfare a bit better, but it's not going to make too much of a difference. So it depends on how you want to save your resources. Obviously, if you want to play her as a DPS, you will need to level her normal attacks, but the multipliers are pretty weak. It's totally up to you. It's really fun and really hot. I'll talk about it later. Something you can do, but it's definitely not recommended, at least from, you know, an effectiveness perspective. Definitely recommended for a culture and enjoyment perspective. Artifact set is very easy. This you're just throwing if you're not using the scroll set, and it's very easy to get a good set for her. You'll probably be farming the Natlan artifact set anyways if you have either Kinich or Mualani or one of the future Natlan DPS. You'll want to look for defense, healing bonus if you're using Favonia's sword, which is her usual free-to-play weapon. We'll talk about weapons in a sec. And then probably ER defense healing bonus if you're using her signature, or if you're using the craftable if you don't have Fav. You want to look for defense percent, ER, and crit rate if you have Favonius, and just defense and ER if you're using her signature. She basically only has 3 weapons that you'd actually go for. Favonius sword, obviously your signature peak patrol song is her best. Basically the big value is the damage bonus that it gives to your team. Here's a little comparison of Mualani, one side using her signature and the other side using Favonius. That's the only thing changed on this team. I don't think it's like obviously it's an increase, and you know, an increase is an increase, But for the amount of Primo Gems that a weapon gives you, I personally wouldn't go for an increase like this, even though it's very strong, right? Even though it does, you know, numbers are improved, very good. But going for a Mualani C1 would have been a much bigger increase than this, right? It probably would have, I would have been able to easily one rotate the boss if I had Mualani C1. So it's not the first upgrade I'd go for, but for a Dolphin player who already has a bunch of upgrades, yeah, it's definitely going to be worth it. But Favonius also is very just comfy and nice and easy to build for. And if for some reason you're lacking Favonius, you can use the craftable sword, which I don't have a copy of. It just gives defense, which is good. It gives her more healing. So that's her build guide. She's overall very, very simple and easy to build. I know the question everyone has is, how are the teams? Let's talk about that next. I tested over 60 teams with Xilonen, so buckle up. This section is going to be pretty long. Keep in mind that the things I'm going to share are sort of a distilled knowledge from all the testing I've done. I've considered all of my characters' builds, how they normally perform, how they performed with Xilonen versus other characters. I've considered the Abyss Blessings. I've considered the enemies, the way that that favors some teams and some characters over others. So I might not always talk about every single nuance, but just remember that I have put a lot of nuanced thought into each thing I give. Still, whatever I say is not definitive. This is just my experience after basically full-time testing, like God knows how many hours, like 30 hours of playing Xilonen. So it's not definitive. We probably won't know like actual definitive by her next rerun, but even still, I think I have a really good handle on where she is. And so my basic findings is that she did elevate a number of characters. She is a side grade for a lot of teams. And there were two really noticeable upgrades that I would consider power creep being part of the conversation. And no, this is not power creep over Kazuha. This is power creep in that she makes Mualani and Neuvillette so ridiculously strong that it feels like you're barely playing the same game. The damage difference now between Neuvillette and Mualani's best teams and basically every other DPS is stratospheric. At least it feels that way to me. That's not to say other DPSs aren't any good at all. It's not like they can't clear, but I think that this is the biggest power difference that I've ever seen in Genshin Impact. In all the time I've been playing, I've never seen two DPSs and two teams so far ahead of everything else. By the way, this whole document will be available below on my Tactor article. It's not meant to be taken super seriously, but if you're looking for team ideas, it can be quite interesting. And we're going to be starting a new giveaway as well. The previous giveaway is wrapped up. I've announced the winner down below. But anyways, these are the Neuvillette teams that I tried. I played most of them all the way through the Abyss to get an idea of how they performed in single target, AoE, multi-wave, etc. I generally feel like not using Furina is griefing. It's still good. Like, the team still does a ridiculous damage, more damage than most teams in the game. But if you want great performance, you know, Furina is by far the best. But you can absolutely get away without it. 100% the team is mega strong, no matter who you're using. Swapping out Kazuha for Lynette, Sucrose, even Xiangling, even for Zhongli, even though it's not like the damage is, it's definitely noticeable. It's definitely a drop off. It's still very, very good. If you choose these three team characters and your fourth character is at least somewhat respectably competent, you're going to have an amazing time. I did really like Lynette's taunt. It could pseudo group up enemies and keep them away to keep you from staggering. So that was really nice. Kazuha, always another level. Xiangling lets you get some vapes. The downside is that it's much easier to get staggered because with the other team, you can kind of kite back and really sit back from a distance, whereas with Xiangling you have to be right up close. The other teams, I feel like you can get away shielderless easier. Obviously, switching Zhongli for Xilonen, you do lose the shield, but you do get some crystallizes, which at least can help you take 1 or 2 hits. But with Xiangling, you have to stay right up close in the face of the enemy to get advantage of the vape. So I don't really like Xiangling shielderless teams. If you have C1, I'm sure this is a lot better, but you know, you got to build energy properly. If you really want to min-max, you got to put Xiangling on instructors, and it's just generally a pain in the butt. So I like to go with Animo. Kazuha is going to be the best. You have such good AoE, you don't even really need the grouping though, which is why I don't mind someone like Lynette. If in the future we ever get another Animo support that does something else, you'll have other options compared to Kazuha, but Kazuha is definitely still the best now. I do think Xilonen is a massive step up for Zhongli. She just does so much. The buffing and the resistance shred is just crazy. Yeah, it's a massive step up for Neuvillette. If you have Neuvillette, I highly recommend getting Xilonen, especially if you have or you ever plan to get C1 Neuvillette. Also, if we ever get an Animo Shielder, it's like you take the best DPS in the game and then you give him a massive damage boost. It's crazy. It's actually crazy. It makes his single target DPS higher than almost every single other DPS other than Mualani, and he is the best AoE DPS in the game. So the rich get richer, man. This is like, it's depressing how good this team is. I'm happy for you, Neuvillette mains. You are absolutely winning. Very, very similarly to Neuvillette mains, Mualani mains are big winning too. Easily, not even close, the fastest single target or like boss clears, or just clears that require you to take a lot of HP from either single target enemies or enemies that are really close together. Mualani is she's just the best. What an absolutely nutty character. And Xilonen actually brings out Mualani's strengths, because previously Animo VV uptime didn't last. You're scratching the absolute bottom of the barrel with random buffers for Mualani. And now Xilonen buffs Mualani's whole rotation. It's so brain dead easy to play. You don't, unlike a lot of the other teams we're going to talk about, you only need to buff hydro damage, so you don't need to be doing any sort of weird, complicated double crystallize setups or worry if one of your things are crystallizing. If you really want to min-max, you can do some funky stuff where you create a crystallize with Candace and put her on Archaic Petra. And then you can put Xiangling on instructors and Xilonen on the scroll set, and then you get absolute peak buffing from all the characters. I didn't try and do that myself. I just played them sort of more normally. But if you really want to min-max, that's what you want to do. I would consider the core Mualani, Xilonen, and usually Xiangling. You can get in single target or against certain types of enemies, you can get away with the other pyros that we talked about in the Mualani guide, Thoma, Xinyan, Dea, etc. But I personally just really like Xiangling for consistency, and I'm sure the Pyro Archon will be the premier option. I find this final option being a Hydro is really nice. Candace finally has an awesome team that she's arguably best in slot for. I personally got slightly better clears from having C1 Mona. In this team, you'll use Mualani's normal attack, crystallize with Xilonen, burst with Xiangling, and then burst with Mona. I run triple fav. You'll get Mualani's burst buffed and her first charge attack, and if you have C1 Mona, then you also get her second charge attack, the C1 buff. But it is a little bit more inconsistent, especially if you don't have C1 Mona, that for a lot of players they might find Candace is better overall. I didn't find having C6 Candace affected my vapes at all. I found it was perfectly fine. Maybe if you're using someone other than Xiangling, that might happen, but for me, I didn't have an issue at all. Candace's giving a normal attack buff is just really, really good. I also found Yelan a very consistent and very reliable option. Yelan's swords hit right after Mualani vapes, so you still get the Yelan damage, personal damage, you still get the damage bonus. You're not getting a ton of Yelan hits throughout the rotation, but you are getting some, and Yelan is buffed pretty significantly by Xilonen on this team, so she's doing non-insignificant damage. Still not as much as you get from how much Mona or Candace buff Mualani, but it's pretty darn close. I found it very, very good. Furina is the most hilarious one. I one-rotated the final boss of this abyss, which is a feat that I definitely can't even come close to that with any other character. Well, Neuvillette was a tiny bit close, but it was kind of fake because it included the explosions and stuff. But this team is just absolutely crazy. The amount of inconsistency though is huge. So often you're going to miss Mualani's vapes. I wouldn't actually recommend this team to someone in particular. It's just very, very inconsistent. If for some reason the Pyro Archon provides like unstoppable pyro application, like she has this magic pyro application that can never be overridden, you know, Natlan fire burns brighter than other fire or something like that. If that would be a thing, then this team would be the team to go for. But as it is, if you miss a Mualani vape, you lose just an absolute truck ton of damage. But if you do get them, then this team is absolutely insane. Overall, I'm absolutely in love with Mualani and Xilonen. The healing is wonderful. Mualani has decent interruption resistance already, and plus the occasional crystallized shard. I don't think I found myself ever staggered a single time. This second character doesn't have to be a Hydro, but the problem is for your next rotation, you're probably not going to be able to get a Hydro crystallized very easily if at all. So although I did really like Emily on this team as well in terms of damage on the first rotation, after that it was kind of suspect because you're not always going to get that Hydro Crystallize. And same thing with Nahida. I like Emily a bit better than Nahida here. I did try and do some stuff like using both Kazuha and Xilonen, but by getting a Crystallize with Xilonen, you're eating up so much Hydro, and it's just way too inconsistent. You can't really get the swirls off of Kazuha after that, so not a fan at all. I'm going to talk about whether I think Mualani or Neuvillette is the new current best DPS in the game. I think both have a very strong case to be made. So I'm going to do a video of how Xilonen changes the tier list. I'm going to do my first updated tier list because Xilonen is just too meta of a character for me to not update my tier list. So I'm going to do that as my next video. Make sure to subscribe for that. It's going to be huge. So yeah, Mualani, already a top 3 DPS. Neuvillette, already the best DPS in the game. Now both of them get a huge buff. The rich get richer, baby. It's insane. A character that I was considering starting to downplay and saying that maybe they've fallen off a little bit was Yelan, but I actually think that Xilonen was quite a huge buff for Yelan as well. Specifically, the new team core Furina, Yelan, Xilonen. You guys are already familiar with the double Hydro team core, but Xilonen is just a totally different beast compared to someone like Jean or Shenhe. Some of the biggest winners who have been added into this team core are the Geo characters. So, you know, it's no secret that I have not had a high opinion of Ito. I thought he was pretty bad, pretty underwhelming, but this team has made me not like an Ito believer, an Ito stan, but I had legitimate fun playing this team. It was legitimately good. I did not struggle to clear and to feel like my team had some power and some oomph behind it. Because not only, and the greatest part about Xilonen on teams like this is that you're not, the on-fielder is not just hard carried by the damage the other two characters are doing. Especially for a Geo character, it's so easy to not only get huge buffs for your Furina and Yelan, well, they will do massive damage, both of them. Xilonen also enables your Ito to do massive damage, like a lot more. So you're getting the buffing from Furina, you're getting the damage from Furina, you're getting the buffing from Yelan, you're getting the damage from Yelan. Both Furina and Yelan have Kazuha level buffs from Shilonen's Resistance Shred, plus Kazuha level buffs from the scroll set, and you also have a healer, which you normally couldn't get with Kazuha. You'd have to run someone like Jean. But on top of that, Xilonen also gives those Kazuha level buffs to Ito, where normally he barely gets buffed at all. I don't think he's on quite the level of characters like Hu Tao or Navia or other really good DPSs like that. I don't think so. But this team actually feels solid and good to play. If you're an Ito main, I highly recommend picking up Xilonen, picking up this team. I'm sorry you now have to ditch if you were getting Chiori, if you were getting Goro and you were building that team. It's still good, obviously, but this team has a much more universal level of vertical investment rather than getting like Chiori and her weapon, getting C6 Goro, you know, all of those specialty niche characters just for Ito. This team performs better than that and with much more general good characters, good supports. Like characters that if you do ever decide to switch it up from Ito, you know, these characters are also going to be amazing on other teams. So Ito, bangin', absolutely bangin'. Very pleasantly surprised by Noelle as well. Comfier to play, simpler to play, easier to play than Ito. I would say overall it's quite similar. I personally got a little bit better damage from the Ito team than from the Noelle team. I still think Noelle is awesome on this team. I definitely think it's her best team. Again, it actually feels good to play. It's comfier than Ito. But I do think Ito's a little better. But, you know, we don't need to fight about that. If you love Noelle, pick yourself up a Xilonen. You're not going to regret it. Ningguang, not bad at all. I've always been very, very underwhelmed by Ningguang. You guys know this. I am a huge Ningguang simp, especially for this skin. Holy hell, she looks good. But her damage does not look good. And if she's always felt so bad to play, not the case anymore. Team feels really quite good. Her burst goes off and you can see the damage. I definitely don't think it's as good as Noelle or Ito, but it's very serviceable. It's very solid. She's not a meta character, but she doesn't feel awful anymore. And that's honestly such a huge win. If you want to see some funny numbers with Ningguang, you can switch Yelan for Bennett, but I don't really like it. I think the Yelan damage is quite important here. It's still better than her old teams, don't get me wrong, with Bennett instead of Yelan, but just do yourself a favor. Take the win. This team is the way to go, in my opinion. You can totally use Chiori here as well. I didn't test it extensively, just a little play. If you have C1 Chiori, this is going to be awesome. Without C1, it means totally fine. You're going to want to on-field Yelan on this team. It's totally good. It's totally fine. It makes me too sad to not use Chiori without her C1. It feels like, it just makes me feel like my Chiori is like an incomplete character. Part of me just wants to get her C1 anyways. One thing that was a little bit worse than I thought was putting an Animo character here. And then it wasn't bad, don't get me wrong. It was quite good, but I definitely wasn't like as blown away as I thought I would be. Because this is basically the Neuvillette team, but with Yelan instead of Neuvillette. So it's kind of just really feels like you should be playing Neuvillette here. It's still good, especially if you have Yelan's signature weapon. If you have her C2, like this would be great. But the thing is, like Kazuha's VV Shred doesn't stack as well on top of Shilonen's Resistance Shred, because how Resistance Shred works, it's less effective the more you have of it. Still good, but it's like, it just feels like such a waste. Like here you've got 4 of the most broken characters in the game at enabling other DPSs, and just none of them are enabling anyone. Like Yelan's best used as an off-fielder, you know, all these characters are better used as off-fielders. Raiden is really, really good. This is an argument for Raiden's best team, 100%. As a C2 Raiden haver now, I tend to still prefer Chevreuse a little bit, because it just makes my Raiden hit a lot harder. It really depends where your vertical investment lies as to where your best Raiden team will be. If your Raiden is super, super invested, you know, Chevreuse, Kujosara, Bennett, Xiangling, some combination of those 4 characters is probably going to really hit the spot for you. But if you've got C1 Furina, you've got C2 Yelan, if you've got with her signature weapon, C2 Furina, then this, and if you've got, you know, R1 Xilonen, and you may or may not have C2 Raiden with or without her weapon, this team may really, really shine for you. It really depends on what you have. And because if you're absolutely at C0 Raiden, it could be that Raiden National is still one of the better teams for you to run. I will say though, the big advantage that Raiden National used to have over Raiden Double Hydro was strength in multi-wave. Now with Xilonen, she automatically refreshes all of those buffs for the next wave as well. Whether or not I would use Raiden National or this team, it just depends on, do you need a bit more AoE, in which case Raiden National is going to kick it? Do you need more single target and more mobility, because Raiden National kind of plays in Bennett's circle a little bit more? Then this team's going to be better. What characters do you need on the other side of the abyss? You know, what are the elemental checks all about? This is definitely a buff for Raiden, because Raiden to this day, her best feature is the amount of teams that she has, the amount of teammates, and how she can add value to other very powerful characters. I found a lot of the time, by the way, for crystallizes, because you want ideally both an electro and a hydro crystallize, I was getting an electro and a hydro crystallize most of the time, just doing a normal rotation, not like splitting up my Xilonen and first crystallizing electro, then crystallizing hydro. I found I generally got both, so your mileage may vary. We'll see how things shake down as people play it more. I would definitely recommend Raiden mains get Xilonen to at least have an option for this team, especially if you don't have C6 Chevreuse. Yeah, and overall definitely a big upgrade from Jean or Shenhe in this last slot, both in terms of just raw damage as well as the multi-wave aspect. This is like the double buffing setup with Kazuha and Xilonen. You get Yai and Raiden. Yai without Dendro, kind of suspect, and then you don't have an attack buffer. Bennett Kazuha used to be my go-to. You'd also get a bunch of overloads, which was non-negligible from Kazuha. This team is alright in multi-wave, but pretty underwhelming for a single target. And I even have C2 Raiden, and it's still a little bit underwhelming. So it's nice, it's cool, but I'd recommend Chevreuse over this team, over the Chevreuse Xiangling over Kazuha Xilonen here. Hu Tao, what can I say? It is another upgrade. Personally, I did find I got better damage from this team than I did from Plunge. Has Shenhe been power crept? Kinda. It kind of seems like Shenhe has been power crept a little bit. If you have C1 Hu Tao, this is going to be even better for you, and that's a really big advantage over Shenhe, where C1 Hu Tao does nothing, but here Even at C0, it's an upgrade, and then with C1, it'll be even better. Don't be fooled. This is not on the same level as Neuvillette and Mualani teams, but it is definitely an upgrade for Hu Tao, and she's definitely very strong, and this continues to cement her as one of the better DPSs in the game. So good for Hu Tao, good for Hu Tao wanters. Get yourself a Xilonen. If you do have a Shenhe, it's not like your Shenhe team is obsolete. So if you love Shenhe, you know, it's okay, but Xilonen is better. I found Xilonen was even more of an upgrade for yoimiya than it was for Hu Tao, because you can do that split Xilonen crystallize that I was talking about and use yoimiya's burst a little bit more. You can probably only burst every other rotation because you don't really build ER on yoimiya, but even still, it increases yoimiya's damage a good bit, and the occasional crystallize does help her survivability. This doesn't buff yoimiya out of the place she's in the way that it buffs Ito and Noelle, but I am pretty confident that this is her best team now, and it definitely makes her feel a lot more usable. For Diluc, I really think you should just stick to Plunge. The thing is, Diluc has an actual good team with Shenhe and Plunge, so I kind of just recommend sticking to that. Yanfei and yoimiya's damage are very, very similar. Yanfei is a bit worse single target. Yoimiya has literally 0 AoE, and Yanfei has a much easier time getting the double crystallize. So one thing that's a bit weird is I did end up preferring yoimiya with Xilonen, whereas I ended up preferring Yanfei with Bennett. And I think that this is because my yoimiya is using the Rust, which gives a ton of attack percent, whereas my Yanfei is using the Tome of the Eternal Flow Neuvillette signature, which makes her lack much more attack, whereas yoimiya is lacking much more of other types of buffs. I do plan on getting yoimiya's signature next time she's on banner, but this is just a good example of how, you know, one person can't test everything, and you have to always take whatever someone says with a grain of salt and sort of translate it to your accounts. If I'm using a signature weapon, you want to translate that into their other weapon. If I'm using a 4-star weapon, you can translate to a signature. If I'm using a C0 character, you can translate into what it would be like if you had their C1. So although I think very thorough testing like mine is very valuable, you don't want to just take one person's opinion at face value. You want to look at multiple opinions and also compare what they have to what you have on your account, because at the end of the day, every account is different and no one can give you perfect advice for yours. I did try Cyno. The damage on this team feels pretty good, and it could possibly even be Cyno's best team, because if you're able to use Furina first and then Cyno, and then you can get a double crystallize, and then you're also getting Hyper Bloom, so you're getting a pretty long shred, so it might actually be his best team. It unfortunately doesn't fix his AoE problems, because you still can't swap out to like reapply Nahida's buff, so if you start a new wave, even though you still get Electro and Hydro Resistance Shred, you're not getting Aggravates or Hyper Blooms, which is definitely a big hit to Cyno's overall damage, but I think on the whole, it might still be a buff. Xilonen's healing also doesn't last too long, so you're quite liable to run out, and Cyno's very in danger of just dying, and so since you can't use Xilonen last in the rotation, you have to use Nahida last. I'm not sure. It might be an upgrade, but it's not like good enough that I would really recommend it, and I think Cyno really needs Dendro to shine. The other Electro Charge teams like Furina, Yelan, or official Furina, I just don't recommend, because he feels like he needs Dendro to get the good damage. But yeah, damage pretty good, but doesn't fix the total issues of Cyno. The final Yelan team is the Ayato version. It's not that great. It's fine because the rest of the core is fine, but Ayato's pros are definitely not his just raw damage, and that's what this team is basically all about, hyper buffing the active characters. So yeah, when you have characters like Neuvillette around, this team just makes him look worse. I feel like, yeah, he's better off in that reaction-based, driver-based role. This team is definitely not where he shines. While we're on the subject of hydro carries, I did try Childe, and I'm just not a fan at all of Childe with Xilonen. I mean, Kazuha just works so much better for so many reasons. It's not that you can't make it work. It's not that it's impossible. It's just like, why would you? Kazuha is perfect in this role. The grouping, everything about it is just perfect. Childe still has a niche. He still shines in this niche, and don't mess with a good thing. Like, just use Kazuha, do yourself a favor. Double crystallize, it works a lot of the time, but it's no picnic on this team. And even if it was, it's just like the grouping is where he stands out. And, you know, the team already has a healer with Bennett, so that's a big downside. Now that brings me to my next point. Most Bennett teams, in my opinion, like teams that used Bennett already and that used him very well, Xilonen is not an upgrade for. There is one exception, but generally not recommended. We'll start with the exception. The exception is Navia. Navia is awesome now. Navia was awesome before, but Navia, Furina, Bennett, Xilonen is so good. For me, this team puts her above most of the other DPSs. My top 5 DPSs is completely different than it was a little bit ago. I gotta update that video too, but we'll do the Xilonen tier list changes, but this is definitely one. I don't know if it doesn't push Navia into like a whole new tier. Like, she doesn't belong with Mualani and Neuvillette. I don't think she's as good as Arlecchino. Not quite, but I don't think she's too far behind. This definitely got her much closer. Navia gets all the benefits that I talked about with the other Geo characters, but it's actually worth investing Bennett instead of Yelan. You'd rather hyper buff her damage. You can swap out Furina for Xiangling. I don't know that I like it. I don't know that I like it better. I don't like it as much, I don't think. It's still very, very good, especially if you want to use Furina on the other side. I do still think this is her second best team. I would say it's the Furina version, then this one, then the Plunge version with Shenyun and Chiori. I think Xilonen does a really good job of just being a better Geo character for Navia's second Geo. It's true she doesn't create as many crystallizes. You're not going to get as full of shots with Navia before you could get, you know, those full 3 charges of shots in your first rotation, all completely maxed out. Now you're only going to get them partially maxed out. You'll want to compensate for this by using Navia's burst a little bit later in the rotation, so you can get some stacks. But even though you're not getting as many stacks as you were before on the other team, the resistance shred that Xilonen gives is just so impactful. The damage bonus is so impactful. You get Furina's personal damage, especially since you're going to use Furina first, then you're going to skill and burst with Xilonen, and that means that you're going to get a Hydro Crystallize, which means you're going to buff Furina hugely. And so overall, it's just a big upgrade. I'm very happy with it. All the other Bennett teams, I basically feel like they can be okay, but it's like either just use Yelan if instead of Bennett, or just use Kazuha. Because the thing is, when you already have Bennett and your on-fielder really likes Bennett, like for example Wriothesley, like you already have Bennett, you already have Furina, so you want to put Xilonen in there. Well, you don't. It's like now you're not getting Xiangling, so you're not getting her reactions, you're not getting her damage. It's just, if you want to swap out Furina for Xiangling, it's still hard to get the cryo swirls. It's still good, like don't get me wrong, you can, like if your Xiangling burst ends and then you apply cryo with Wriothesley, yeah, you can get those cryo swirls, and it's gonna, not swirls, crystallizes, and it's gonna last longer. So it's definitely better than it used to be, but it's still just like, to swap out Furina here for Xilonen is just not a worthy trade meta-wise. So all of these teams are fine, but they're all kind of downgrades, or they're side grades. It's like, yeah, I just prefer the Furina Bennett Xiangling core or the Furina Bennett Kazuha core. Bennett and Kazuha together are so good because you can also infuse, like if we're looking at something like, I don't know, something like this, right? If we're looking at Kazuha here, you can swirl Electro and Hydro with Kazuha, Pyro infuse your burst, and then you're getting vapes from Furina. You can't replicate this with Xilonen. Like the Kazuha Bennett Furina core is amazing, and so is the Xiangling Bennett Furina core, and Xilonen just doesn't mesh. Where Xilonen shines the most is either where you don't really want to use Kazuha, or you don't really want to use Bennett, or you don't really want to use Furina. When these characters all have such good synergy together, that's where things become a little bit suspect for Xilonen. Still good, right? Everything here is still good, but I just don't feel like there's really any reason to use Xilonen over Kazuha or Xiangling or whoever else you're using on any of these teams that I have listed here. I was intrigued by the Xilonen Furina Kazuha core. Like, it's obviously super good with Neuvillette. The thing about this core though is that it is a true hyper carry core. So you want whatever the final character is to have great multipliers, not be attack scaling, because then you'd want to swap out one of these characters for Bennett, and usually that would be Xilonen, unless of course it's like Navia, and you want the character to not be reaction based unless they're reacting with Hydro. So that leaves you with nobody. So I tried, you know, various teams, but I couldn't find anything to work. One thing I was pretty excited about was Ayaka with Furina, Xilonen, Shenhe. It was pretty alright. I hoped that it would be better than it was. I think some people have found that this is, you know, Ayaka's best single target team. I just found that without grouping, it just freeze loses so much of its impact. And I don't know if I'm crazy. I found I get better single target damage with a team like this. You're getting the attack buff from Bennett. You're getting some melts. You're getting some of this. You're getting some vapes. I found that this did more single target damage. So I wouldn't recommend pulling Xilonen for Ayaka, but I do know that some people have found that Shenhe, Xilonen, Furina, Ayaka was Ayaka's strongest single target team. Just really cringe for grouping. So your mileage may vary, but it definitely wasn't, if it is stronger, it's definitely not so much stronger that I would personally recommend going for it. I think better stuff will come for Cryo in the future. I keep waiting for every new unit to save Cryo, but unfortunately, as awesome as Xilonen is, she's not saving Cryo. I also tried no Furina and like sort of a mono Cryo kind of thing. It's all right, but now you have grouping, but you don't have freeze. So, I don't know about this. I can't in good conscience recommend this 21, unfortunately. Clorinde. Because Clorinde often isn't run with Bennett, I did find I was pretty happy with teams like this. You don't have to run Fischl. You can do Kujosara. I found Kujosara better for one rotation, but after that, the burst doesn't line up anymore, and then you're wasting skill up time instead of using the burst. I found Fischl was just a bit more consistent. This team felt like slightly worse than Chevreuse C6. So if you don't have Chevreuse C6, then this is like a good option that is more multi-wave friendly. You can also swap out Furina for Nahida, and you lose the raw buffing, but you get a lot of aggravates. And so this is obviously her aggravate team, but instead of Kazuha, you're using Xilonen. Because Clorinde's AoE is actually pretty good, and you don't have to swap out to reapply buffs, I was kind of surprised by how decent this team actually was. Don't think it's going to change the game. Don't think it's going to like blow anyone's mind. But in terms of just ease of use and just consistency, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of players found really good results or better results with this team than the other aggravate. Can be kind of hard to get some swirls with Nahida sometimes. And Nahida can also hold Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer. Switch her to an energy recharge stance to keep the buff uptime. Open the rotation with Fischl, then crystallize with Xilonen. Nahida, pass the buff to Clorinde. Honestly, not as good as C6 Chevreuse, but definitely better than C0 Chevreuse, and functions in a very, very similar way. Obviously, multi-wave, you don't reapply Nahida's skill, so you kind of lose some value that Xilonen brings to a multi-wave. You can alleviate that by replacing Nahida with someone that can apply in multi-wave, be that Baiju or Kirara. I think Kirara overall is the slightly better choice with slightly better buffs and some interruption resistance. Ideally, one day we get an off-field Dendro character that can apply Dendro in multi-waves, but I don't know. I don't know how much they want to like push Nahida out of the roles that she has, but maybe they will. You might be tempted to keep Furina and instead swap Fischl for the Dendro, but this team was really hard to get consistent double crystallizes on, so I can't really recommend this one. Might be interested in Kazuha here. Very cringe setups, have to start with Clorinde's burst, Furina's skill and burst, then Kazuha swirl, then Xilonen crystallize. It's super cringe. I super don't like it. Could technically be okay, I guess, but definitely don't recommend. I think the final Furina team I want to talk about is Xilonen as a DPS. For this team, you don't want to run Yelan because you want to make sure you're giving more damage to Xilonen. So you actually don't want to activate her passive where you have all the Geo samplers activated or whatever. So you want to use Goro, Shanya, and Furina, specifically this team. I was getting like 18k plunges or something. It was like, okay. It was so hot though. She looks amazing doing her plunge animation. Highly recommend giving it a try for a culture perspective, but for actual power, for clearing the abyss, don't recommend it for players wanting to do actual damage, but it is pretty awesome. Okay, we've already talked about most of the next section, which is non-Furina Bennett teams. I kind of accidentally talked about them during my Bennett Furina teams. Navia, Xiangling, good, but Furina better. Childe, already talked about it. Risley with Xiangling, talked about it. Ryo, Kazuha, Ganyu. Lyney, I mean, you know, it's fine, but again, Kazuha applying Pyro, Furina getting some vapes, that's crazy. You know, Zhongli gives interruption resistance. Like, sure, if you can stomach it, she can be upgrade over Zhongli, but she's not providing the defensive utility, and then Furina is going to do more damage. So I don't think it really changes the game for Lyney. this team is super funny because you've got 2 healers and the Arlecchino still can't be healed, so that's really funny. Basically, you're just better off playing Yelan or Emily instead of Xilonen here, and then if you replace Kazuha with Yelan or Emily, you're sort of just better off replacing Xilonen with Kazuha. I mean, you do get some crystallizes, so like something like this is kind of like a middle ground between Zhongli and Kazuha, whereas Kazuha doesn't give you any defensive utility, and at least some crystallizes give you 1 or 2 resistance interruption, which is often all you need. You can use Emily here. Again, you're losing grouping. This is an easier setup than with Yelan. It's okay, but Kazuha better. And that's the same goes for Klee, etc. Already talked about Ryo, already talked about Mualani, talked about Clorinde. Keqing is just Clorinde, except she gets even more from Kazuha than Clorinde did, so I don't recommend Keqing. And I think that's it. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, that's it. Now on to her value and power level. So like I said, she causes Neuvillette and Mualani to power creep the rest of the DPS like crazy. In my opinion, she really makes some characters shine. She makes characters like Navia shine even more. She also makes characters like Navia shine, not to the same degree as the others, but to a pretty big degree. And she brings characters, you know, completely out of meta relevance, like Ito and Noelle and Ningguang, into like a pretty respectable place. She's an upgrade for a lot of other characters like Hu Tao, Yelan, and a lot of Yelan teams. So she's an upgrade to quite a number of characters overall. And there are definitely characters where she's not really an upgrade for, right? Strong characters like Arlecchino, weaker characters like Cryo, and then she's sort of a side grade to a bunch of electro characters and other things like that. That's how I sort of would distill everything overall. Now that I've actually played her and tested her with basically every character, I do think she is a little bit better than Kazuha. I don't think she's a lot better. I think she's like noticeably better in the fact that she really lifts up the meta of really strong characters, and she elevates some characters into relevancy. The fact that she's a healer, that she can, you know, pair with Furina so well, that she makes a new team core with Furina Yelan herself. I know it's an old team core, but she makes it so much better. And the fact that her buffs apply throughout multiple waves and they apply for longer than Kazuha, I do think that that gives her the slight edge, because in exchange for that, Kazuha can group, and that definitely, and he also applies, he can infuse with an element and do some personal damage, and so that is definitely valuable. 100%. I just think overall the value proposition from Xilonen is just a little bit higher. Definitely not a crazy amount. I think that they're both S tier units, and depending on if you're playing certain DPSs, Kazuha's the one you need. Other DPSs, Shilonen's the one that gives you the edge. I would say Xilonen is a better side grade for the team for overall than Kazuha is to Xilonen teams. Like, Xilonen can be a side grade for an Arlecchino team better than Kazuha can be a side grade for a Mualani team overall. But I wouldn't say she power creeps Kazuha, right? I would not say that. She's different enough. Good job, Genshin, for balancing the character to make her do functionally like the same thing as Kazuha, but in a different enough way that she buffs different units. And really good on them for figuring out how to buff Geo in such a cool way. I'm really like, they put a ton of work into this unit to make sure that they were balanced, although they couldn't figure out a way to not buff Mualani and Neuvillette into absolute chaos. I don't know where we go from here, considering that I think that Mavuika is going to buff these characters even more. Probably we'll see. Like I said earlier, I'm gonna update my tier list. Now that I've played with Xilonen, we need a full tier list update because she changes so much, and my previous tier list is just out of date now. My top 5 DPS video is out of date now, so we really need to make that again. I think we're just going to update the tier list, and I'll make a new top 5 DPS after we've had more new DPSs come out. Do I think she's a must pull? I mean, no. It just depends on the team that you're playing. If you're playing certain teams, you really want to get her. If you're playing other teams, you may be able to skip her. Really depends on what DPSs you're really aiming for. For vertical investment, weapon C1. I showed you my weapon comparison earlier on. I think it's a good upgrade, but it doesn't like change everything. Her Constellation 1, the general consensus for the interruption resistance part of her C1 is that it's not that great. So don't get it for that. Nice to have, probably stop you from being staggered here and there, but it's not anything close to what Neuvillette C1, Arlecchino C1, etc, etc, etc. It gives you more Night Soul Blessing efficiency, nice quality of life. I just realized that this is just quality of life constellation. Oh, except for the other part. I kind of want to get C1 for better exploration, but no, it should be fine. Exploration is already fine. I already have so many characters, it's fine. C2 is nutty. The Geo Source sample will already remain active. This means that you can swap out Yelan for Goro on your Ito team and really sing. So Ito mains probably should go for C2, like if you're true Ito main. Geo, damage dealt plus 50%, massive, huge buff. Pyro attack 45%, solid, not insane, solid. Probably the worst one here. Hydro, max HP 45%, really quite good. Way better than attack 45 because HP is rarer than attack, or like it scales better because your base attack is a lot of it's based on your weapon, but HP is just your HP stats. So getting an HP multiplier is more impactful than getting attack multiplier. Cryo, crit damage 60%, very big. Electro, restore 25 energy, decrease elemental burst cooldown by 6 seconds. This is really cool for Raiden specifically. Also for Clorinde, this suddenly allows you to run really tight rotations with characters that you didn't used to be able to before. I don't know how great it is because well, like it's definitely good. I think it's really fun. I don't know how good it actually is. Wait, why didn't I test Raiden, Yai, Furina, Xilonen? Oh yeah, because it's worse than Yelan. But you could do something like that. It makes Raiden actually have better synergy with Sara and with Yai, but I don't see like the real impact. So this constellation is like really good, but not good for all types. Like it's way better for Geo than it is for anyone else, then probably Hydro. It's good for Cryo, but not really that, she's not really that good with Cryo units anyways, and Pyro, similar kind of thing. So yeah. Her other constellations, I'm not really going to cover because that's just for simps and whales, and it's just not my expertise. So have at her if you love her. But yeah, C2, I would say weapon is more like a cheaper upgrade. If you've already got, your main DPS's weapon, your main DPS's early constellation, you got Furina C1, then you can go for Shilonen's weapon, and then, or potentially your C2, like if you're a Geo character. And if you want to see the weapon comparison, go back to the weapon section. Naturally, I love her for Overworld. She's great in Natlan, but she's great outside of Natlan too. Being able to just skate up cliffs is really awesome. You can do a bit of mining with her. Being able to traverse rough terrain, unlike Yelan can't really traverse rough terrain. Being able to dash, do a little bit of dash, it's just so nice. I love her in the Overworld. So good. The jumping is so graceful. And yeah, I think like even outside of Natlan, she'll still be good. It's just not as long. Like it does run out a little bit fast, especially if you're dashing. But I think even still, it's still so good for vertical traversal. I'm really happy Genshin is like spreading the love a bit more for traversal characters. Like now, you can have Shen Yun plus Yelan plus Xilonen, or 2 out of the 3, and Mualani, 2 out of the 4, and you're like good to go. Kanech, like there's so many characters that have good exploration now, and Shilonen's one of them. So overall, that is Xilonen. Let me know your thoughts. Also, she's the hottest character in the game. Like what? Excuse me? This is crazy. She's anyways. Look at that burst animation. Like they cooked with Xilonen. I don't know what to say. Let me know your thoughts. Take care. Bye for now.